Mara was born on a warm evening in a small village surrounded by wide fields and quiet hills. From the moment she entered the world, people noticed she was different. She was larger than most newborns, with long arms and legs that looked like they belonged to a child older than she was. Her mother, Lila, held her close and said it only made her special. Her father stayed silent, unsure what to think, and the midwives murmured among themselves. But for a while, life felt peaceful. As Mara grew, her height began to attract more and more attention. By the time she was 6, she was nearly the size of a grown woman. She towered over other children, and even over some adults. Her mother tried to dress her in simple clothes that would make her look smaller, but nothing could hide her size. Children in the village stared at her. Some whispered that she looked like she came from another world. Others said she was too big to be a child at all. Still, Mara tried to smile. She loved the sound of the river behind the village and the feeling of warm soil beneath her feet. She helped her mother carry baskets of vegetables and could lift things that even grown men found heavy. Her mother gently told her that strength was a blessing, but Mara noticed that her father rarely looked her in the eyes. And as she grew taller, he grew more distant. Around this time, Mara's vision began to fade. At first, she thought it was only tiredness. She rubbed her eyes when the world looked blurry. But the blurriness did not go away. Slowly, faces became fuzzy shapes. The bright colors of the market turned into dull clouds of light. She often tripped over small stones or bumped into doorways. Her mother would gently take her hand, but Mara could hear the worry in her voice. The villagers noticed too. They said it was unusual enough for a girl to grow so tall, but to lose her sight at the same time made her even more mysterious. Some people were kind and told her mother to seek help. Others whispered strange stories Mara never understood but always felt. She could feel the stares even if she could not see them clearly. By the time she was 9, the world had become a soft blur. She could only recognize people when they spoke, and even then, she often guessed wrong. When children played in the fields, she tried to join them, but they ran away because they feared she might fall on them or accidentally hurt them. She never once harmed anyone, yet everyone treated her as if she might. Her parents argued more often. Money was tight, and her father said caring for her was becoming too difficult. He spoke in a low voice, but Mara could still hear the heavy sadness and frustration in it. Her mother would always defend her, saying Mara only needed patience and love. But each day, fear and misunderstanding in the village grew stronger, and Mara felt the weight of it on her shoulders. One afternoon, a group of travelers arrived in the village. They came with bright wagons, music, and voices that filled the air with excitement. Children ran after them, laughing and clapping. The traders brought cloth, tools, spices, and stories from faraway places. Adults gathered to see what they had, hoping to buy something useful. Mara stayed close to her mother, listening quietly to the sounds around her. The traders noticed Mara almost immediately. They whispered among themselves, surprised by her height and slow steps. One of them, a man with a smooth voice, approached her parents and asked about the tall girl. Her father explained softly that she was their daughter and that she had trouble seeing. The trader's tone shifted, sounding interested in a way that made Mara uneasy, though she did not know why. Days passed, and the traders stayed longer than usual. They visited homes, bought produce, and sold goods. But they kept returning to Mara's family, asking questions that made her mother uncomfortable. Mara heard pieces of their conversations but could not understand them completely. She only knew her mother's voice grew sadder each time. Then came the morning that changed Mara's life forever. She awoke to the sound of her parents whispering. Her mother was crying, and her father was speaking quietly, but firmly. Mara's heart began to race. She sat up and reached out for her mother's hand. Her mother held her tightly, but she did not speak. The traders returned a short time later, and Mara felt something shift in the air. Her father told her to gather her small bag of belongings. Confused, she asked where she was going. Her father hesitated, then said there were people who could take care of her better. Mara did not understand what that meant, but the tone of his voice made her chest feel tight. Her mother embraced her and whispered, "Forgive us. We only want what is best for you." Mara felt her mother's tears fall onto her shoulder. She held her as tightly as she could, trying to memorize the shape of her mother's arms. When her father gently pulled her away, she felt her mother trembling. The smooth-voiced trader took her hand. His grip felt too firm. Mara resisted at first, but her father told her to go. She called out for her mother, who answered softly, "I love you, child." But the words sounded far away. Mara was guided toward the trader's wagon. She tried to look back, but her fading vision showed only shadows. She could not see her mother anymore. She could not see her home. The wagon door closed behind her with a soft thud, and the sound echoed through her whole body. During the journey, Mara sat silently in a corner of the wagon. The road beneath the wheels rattled softly, and the voices of the traders flowed around her. They spoke cheerfully to each other, but they did not speak kindly to her. They talked about the towns they would visit, and the people they would show her to. She heard them mention her height again and again, as if that was the only thing about her that mattered. Mara did not cry. She simply sat with her hands folded in her lap, trying to understand what she had done wrong. She wondered if her size or her poor eyesight made her too difficult for her parents. She wondered if she truly brought trouble like some villagers said. She wondered if there was a place where she would not feel like she was a problem. As the wagon moved from one town to another, Mara felt more lost than ever. She did not know where she was going, and she had no way of seeing the world outside. Her only comfort was the distant memory of her mother's voice. Even so, the world still held small signs of hope. When the wagon stopped at night, Mara would hear crickets singing and the soft sigh of the wind. Those sounds reminded her of home and made her feel a little less alone. She did not know what the traders planned for her. She only knew she had to stay strong, because she had learned long ago that she could not rely on others to protect her. And deep inside her heart, she still believed someone, somewhere, might one day look at her and see more than her height, or her blurry eyes, or her differences. She imagined a place where kindness was as common as sunlight. She did not know how far it was, or whether she would ever reach it. But she held that small hope gently, like a soft flame in her hands. For now, all she could do was sit in the moving wagon, listen to the world around her, and wait for whatever life would bring next. The days with the traders slowly blended together for Mara. She lost track of time as the wagon traveled through towns she could not see, and landscapes that existed only as sounds and smells. Sometimes she heard birds she had never heard in her village. Sometimes she smelled new foods being cooked nearby. But she rarely had the chance to step outside the wagon unless the traders needed her to. In the beginning, Mara tried to ask questions. She wanted to know where they were going, how long they would stay, and if she would ever see her parents again. But the traders did not seem interested in answering her. They were not unkind in a loud or harsh way. They simply spoke to her as if she were a job to be managed, rather than a child to be cared for. When she asked too many questions, they told her to rest or be quiet. She learned that the traders liked to visit fairs, busy marketplaces, and gatherings where people came from different places. They said these places were full of excitement, music, and stories. But for Mara, these places were crowded, confusing, and full of unfamiliar voices. When they brought her out, she often stood still, unsure of where to walk. Her steps were slow because she could not see the ground clearly. The traders would gently guide her by the arm, telling her to stand in one place so people could look at her. At first, Mara did not understand why people stared. She thought maybe they were curious because she was new. But as days passed, she realized they were surprised at her height. She often heard the same whispers, soft at first, then louder. People called to their friends, telling them to come look at the tall girl. Some spoke, as though she could not hear them. Others asked questions about her eyesight, wondering why she moved so carefully. The traders sometimes answered for her, often in ways that made her feel small. They described her with short words that felt too sharp, too simple, as if those words were the most important things about her. Mara wished she could tell people that she liked the sound of rivers, that she used to help her mother in the garden, or that she loved the feel of warm rain, but she stayed quiet because she did not know what she was allowed to say. Even though the traders never shouted at her or treated her roughly, Mara sensed they saw her more as part of their work than as a person. When she needed help walking, they would guide her. But they would also remind her to be careful not to step on anything important. When she was tired, they would give her a place to sit. But it was always the simplest spot. Never a place meant to make her feel comfortable. They did what was needed, but only what was needed. Still, Mara tried her best not to cause trouble. She listened carefully to instructions, learned the sound of each trader's footsteps, and tried to make her movements gentle and controlled. She thought that if she behaved well, maybe they would treat her more like a member of their group rather than an extra piece of equipment. But their behavior never changed much, and Mara learned not to expect too much. There were moments, however, when she felt small pieces of kindness. One of the younger traders, a soft-spoken woman named Tessa, sometimes brought her warm bread or fruit when the others were busy. Tessa did not say much, but she often placed a hand on Mara's shoulder before leaving, a quiet way of telling her she was not completely alone. Mara treasured those small gestures more than she could say. During long travels, Mara spent most of her time listening. She listened to the wooden wheels turning, the rustle of the wind through trees, and the voices of people passing by. She began to recognize the sound of different places. Some towns were noisy and crowded, filled with laughter and shouting. Others were quiet, with long pauses between footsteps and faraway conversations. The world felt very wide to her, bigger than she imagined back in her village. Her favorite moments came at night, when the traders stopped to rest. After they set up small fires and cooked their meals, the world would calm down. Stars shone above them, though Mara could only see them as soft glimmers. She often sat near the wagon, feeling the cool air on her face. In these moments, she imagined stories about her old home. She wondered if her mother still prayed for her. She wondered if her father felt regret or if he believed he made the right choice. Sometimes, she held her hands out and pretended she could catch the wind. It made her feel lighter, as if she could drift away into a place that belonged only to her. Despite the quiet moments, traveling with the traders was never truly easy. Mara had to perform small tasks whenever the traders asked. They sometimes showed her to crowds, though they never asked her to do anything dangerous or inappropriate. Still, Mara felt uncomfortable when many eyes focused on her. Even if she could not see their faces clearly, she could feel their stares, their surprise, and their curiosity. It made her skin tingle, and she wished she could disappear. The traders would sometimes talk about her when they thought she was not listening. They spoke about how people reacted to her height, or how unusual her steps were because of her poor vision. They wondered how long they could continue traveling with her. Their words were not cruel, but they were not warm either. Mara often felt as though she were a puzzle they were trying to solve. One afternoon, after visiting a busy town, the traders stopped near a large open field to rest. The sun was warm, and the air smelled like fresh grass. Tessa helped Mara down from the wagon and let her sit near a patch of wildflowers. Mara leaned forward and touched the petals gently. They felt soft and cool under her fingers. For the first time in a long while, she felt a small spark of happiness. She heard distant birds singing, and the sound reminded her of mornings in her village. For a few minutes, she forgot about the traders, the fairs, and the many unfamiliar places. She felt like a child again, not a curiosity to be examined. But the moment did not last long. One of the traders called her name, and she slowly stood up, brushing her hands against her dress. She wished she could stay near the flowers a little longer, but she walked toward the voice, careful not to trip. As the days continued, Mara began to feel tired, not just from walking or traveling, but from being watched everywhere she went. She wished someone would talk to her as a friend, ask her how she felt, or tell her stories for comfort. She wished someone would hold her hand the way her mother used to. But she knew she had to accept the life she had for now. One evening, the traders arrived at a small ranching town. Mara could smell the scent of hay and horses before she even stepped out of the wagon. The air felt warm and peaceful, and the quiet voices of people nearby sounded gentle. It felt different from the noisy towns she had visited before. The traders prepared for another day of showing their goods, and Mara expected to stand in her usual spot while people looked at her with puzzled eyes. But she did not know that this town was unlike the others. She did not know that her life was about to change in ways she could never imagine. She could not see him yet, but somewhere in that quiet crowd was a man who would see her differently from everyone else. He would not be frightened by her height or confused by her slow steps. He would not whisper or stare. Instead, he would see a child who needed kindness, a child who deserved hope. Mara did not know it then, but the rancher who would change her life forever was already walking toward the place where she stood. When the traders arrived in the ranching town, Mara could sense something different in the air. The place felt quieter, warmer, and more peaceful than the busy towns they usually visited. She could smell fresh hay and hear cows moving slowly in their pens. Somewhere nearby, a horse whinnied, its voice soft and friendly. This was a place where people lived close to the earth, close to animals, close to quiet work. The traders guided her to stand beside the wagon as usual. They spoke to the townspeople in cheerful voices, inviting them to look at their goods. Mara stood still, listening to footsteps and voices around her. She heard curiosity, but not the loud excitement she was used to. People spoke in gentle tones, asking simple questions, not whispering sharply or pointing loudly. As she stood there, she suddenly heard a slow, steady sound footsteps that moved with confidence but without hurry. They did not sound like someone rushing over to see something unusual. They sounded like someone simply walking with purpose. Mara turned her head slightly, feeling the presence of someone stopping just a few steps away from her. "Hello there," a deep, warm voice said. Mara blinked a few times, trying to see the shape of the person speaking. All she could make out was a tall blur. Not as tall as she was, but clearly strong. She hesitated, unsure if she should respond. The traders had told her to stay quiet unless spoken to directly. Still, the voice felt different, gentle, calm, not judging. "Are you all right?" the voice asked again. This time, Mara nodded slowly. "Yes," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if it was true. The man stepped a little closer, but not too close. He did not reach out to touch her as some people did. He simply stood there, giving her space. "My name is Elias Turner," he said. "I have a ranch just outside town. I noticed you didn't seem very comfortable." Mara swallowed softly. "I can't see well," she admitted in a quiet voice. "Sometimes it's hard to know where to stand." We... Elias nodded, even though she couldn't see the gesture clearly. "That must be difficult," he said with understanding rather than pity. "Do these people take care of you?" Before Mara could answer, the smooth-voiced trader stepped in quickly. "Of course we do," he said with a bright smile that Mara could hear, even if she couldn't see. "She travels with us. She's safe with us." But Elias did not seem convinced. He looked at Mara again, noticing how she held her hands together tightly, how her shoulders were slightly hunched as if she were expecting criticism. He could see that she was trying to shrink into herself, even though her height made that impossible. "What's your name?" Elias asked gently. "Mara," she said. The name sounded small in her own ears. "Mara," he repeated softly, as if committing it to memory. "That's a beautiful name." She did not hear people say things like that often. Usually, they spoke about her height, not her name. Mara felt a little warmth spread in her chest. The trader quickly moved between them again. "She's been with us for a while," he said. "People like to see her. She's interesting." Elias's eyes softened. He didn't like the word interesting being used in that way. Mara was a child, not an object. He looked back at her, noticing how she stayed quiet, not knowing what she was allowed to say. "Do you want to sit down?" Elias asked her kindly. Mara's breath caught. No one at the fairs had ever asked her that. She wasn't sure if she was supposed to answer. After a moment, she whispered, "Am I allowed to?" Elias's expression changed. Something in her voice, soft, worried, unsure, touched him deeply. It was the voice of someone who had learned to expect restrictions. "Of course you are," he said. "You should never have to ask if you're allowed to rest." Mara felt her throat tighten. She didn't know what else to do, so she simply nodded. Elias turned to the traders. "May I help her sit?" The traders looked at each other. They didn't want to cause trouble, especially in a quiet town where people respected one another. "Fine," the leader said. "As long as she stays near the wagon." Elias guided her to a wooden bench nearby. His touch on her arm was light, almost unsure, but full of care. Mara sat down slowly, feeling the steady ground beneath her feet. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she could breathe without trying too hard. "How long have you been traveling with them?" Elias asked gently. "I don't remember exactly," Mara said. "I hear many people, many towns. It all blends together." Elias listened carefully. He didn't interrupt or rush her. He waited for her to speak at her own pace. "Do you miss home?" he asked quietly. Mara hesitated. "Yes," she whispered. "But I don't know if home misses me." Her voice trembled a little. She quickly lowered her head. Elias's heart tightened. He could see that Mara's strength wasn't just in her height, but in the way she held herself together, despite everything. "What happened?" he asked softly. Mara didn't know how to answer. She didn't want to speak badly about her parents. She didn't want to say anything that would cause trouble. So she simply said, "They said someone else could take care of me better." Elias understood far more than her simple words revealed. He didn't ask more questions. Instead, he nodded slowly, his face full of compassion. As the day continued, Elias stayed nearby. He watched the traders interact with Mara. They weren't unkind, but they treated her more like part of their work than a child who needed care. She followed every instruction with quiet obedience, stepping carefully and moving slowly, afraid of bumping into anything. When she nearly tripped on a small stone, Elias stepped forward instinctively, steadying her gently. "Thank you," Mara said in a soft voice. "You're welcome," he replied warmly. "You're doing just fine." The traders seemed to grow uneasy as they saw how naturally Mara trusted Elias's voice. They talked among themselves, wondering if it was wise to stay too long. But before they could decide to leave, Elias approached them. "I'd like to talk about Mara," he said calmly. The traders exchanged glances. "What about her?" "I can't help noticing she doesn't seem happy," Elias said. "She seems scared, unsure. She needs a home, not a life of traveling." The traders tried to shift the conversation with cheerful words, but Elias didn't budge. He had the steady patience of a man who worked with animals and knew how to read quiet signs. "I'd like to take her in," he said simply. The traders hesitated. They weren't cruel, but they were practical people. They knew caring for Mara required more patience than they could give. It was easier to let her go. They agreed after a long conversation, and Elias made arrangements immediately. He walked back to Mara, who stood still, unsure of what was happening. "Mara," he said softly, "you're coming with me now." She blinked in surprise. "With you?" "Yes," he said. "To my ranch. You don't have to travel anymore. You don't have to stand in crowds. You don't have to worry about doing the wrong thing. You'll have a home." Mara felt a warmth spread through her entire body, something she hadn't felt in years. "But why?" she whispered. "Because," Elias said, his voice full of gentle certainty, "you're not a burden. You're not something to be shown around. You're a gift. A gift from God." Mara, anyone with a good heart can see that. Her breath caught. No one had ever said anything like that to her. No one had ever spoken with such kindness or certainty. "Am I really?" she asked softly, almost afraid the answer would vanish if she spoke too loudly. "Yes," Elias said. "You are." In that moment, Mara felt something lift inside her, something heavy she had carried for far too long. She could not see Elias clearly, but she felt the truth in his words. For the first time since leaving her village, she felt a sense of hope growing inside her. A hope that maybe, just maybe, She would finally find a place where she belonged. When Mara stepped onto Elias's ranch for the first time, she felt the world change around her. The air smelled fresh, like grass and sunshine mixed together. She heard the soft sounds of horses moving in their stalls, and the gentle creaking of wooden fences. The wind brushed her face, carrying the peaceful hush of a place where life moved slowly, not in rushed steps or loud crowds. Elias guided her gently, letting her hold his arm so she could walk with confidence. "There's no hurry here," he said kindly. "Take your time." His words comforted her more than he realized. For so long, Mara had lived in fear of doing something wrong, of stepping in the wrong direction, of making someone upset. Now there was space around her, wide, calm space, where she didn't feel watched or judged. Elias showed her a small room in his house where she would stay. It was simple but cozy, with a soft bed, a small dresser, and a window that let in warm light. Mara reached out slowly, touching the edges of the furniture. Everything felt safe, steady, real. "This is yours," Elias said gently. "You can rest whenever you want." "Mine," Mara whispered, as if she couldn't believe it. "Yes," he said with a smile in his voice. "You belong here now." She felt her heart swell with warmth. She sat on the bed carefully, feeling the softness beneath her. It felt like the first real home she'd had in a long time. The next morning, Mara woke to the sound of birds singing outside her window. She sat up slowly, unsure at first of where she was, but then she remembered Elias's ranch, the kind voice, and the gentle way he had treated her. For the first time in many months, her first waking thought was not fear or confusion, it was peace. Elias knocked lightly on her door. "Breakfast is ready when you are," he said. "Take your time." Mara got dressed as best as she could, feeling out her clothes carefully. She walked slowly down the hall, using the wall for guidance. When she reached the kitchen, the warm smell of fresh bread filled the air. Elias had prepared simple food, warm eggs, fruit, and bread that melted in her mouth. He didn't rush her, didn't stare at her, didn't treat her as someone unusual. He simply shared a meal with her. After breakfast, Elias said, "Come, there's something I want to show you." He took her outside to the horse stables. The horses whinnied softly, as if welcoming her. Mara stood still, listening to their gentle movements. She felt something peaceful in their presence. "Would you like to meet them?" Elias asked. "I don't know if I can," she said uncertainly. "You can," he replied. "And I'll help you." He guided her hand to the side of a calm old mare named Daisy. Mara touched the horse's coat slowly. It felt warm and smooth, and she could feel Daisy's steady breathing beneath her fingers. Mara smiled a soft, uncertain smile that grew each second she stood there. "She likes you," Elias said. "How can you tell?" Mara asked. "She's relaxed," he said. "Horses know when someone has a gentle heart." Mara felt a spark of happiness. She stayed by Daisy's side, feeling her breath, listening to her slow movements. Something about the horse made Mara feel seen, even without eyes that worked well. Days passed, and Mara learned more about the ranch. Elias taught her where each fence stood, where the garden began, and how to use the sound of the wind to know which direction she was walking. She learned to recognize the soft neigh of each horse, and even the distant hum of the stream behind the house. Elias was patient. He never rushed her. When she made mistakes, he simply guided her again. Mara began to grow more confident. She walked across the yard without holding anyone's arm. She helped carry buckets of water. She even learned to brush the horses by following their steady shapes with her hands. The town noticed her too. At first, people were curious but cautious, unsure how to approach her. But as time passed, they saw how kind and respectful she was. Mara always spoke softly, always thanked people, and always tried her best, even when simple tasks took her longer. Slowly, the townspeople grew comfortable around her. Some of the children liked visiting the ranch to see the horses. At first, they were shy around Mara because of her height, but once they realized she had a gentle smile and listened carefully to their stories, they stopped being afraid. They asked her questions, told her jokes, and sometimes even tried to guide her hand so she could see the world through touch. Their innocence made her laugh, something she hadn't done freely in a long time. One afternoon, a local doctor visited the ranch. Elias had asked him to come, wondering if something could be done for Mara's eyesight. Mara was nervous, but Elias stayed beside her the entire time. The doctor examined her eyes gently and explained in simple words that he could help her see a little better. Not perfectly, but better than before. Mara felt a spark of hope. She had lived in a blurry world for so long. She wondered what it would be like to see shapes more clearly again, to recognize colors, to see the sky in a way her childhood memories barely held. The doctor created special lenses for her simple ones, not too heavy. When Mara first placed them on her face, she gasped softly. The world was still not sharp, but she could see more detail than before. Trees had clearer shapes. The horses looked like gentle brown clouds, but with more defined lines. And Elias, she could finally see the outline of his face. "I can see you," Mara whispered, her voice trembling with wonder. Elias chuckled softly. "Well, I'm glad," he said kindly. Mara smiled, a full, bright smile that made her look even taller. But in a beautiful way. Life became full and warm for her. She helped Elias with small chores around the ranch. She learned the sound of every gate, every creaking board in the barn. She grew stronger, not just in body, but in spirit. She began to walk with her head a little higher, not because of her height, but because she finally felt valued. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in soft colors she could barely see, Mara sat beside Elias on the wooden porch. "Do you ever think about your old home?" he asked gently. "Sometimes," she said softly, "but it feels far away now." "Does it still hurt?" he asked. Mara thought carefully. "A little," she admitted, "but I think maybe things had to happen that way so I could come here." Elias nodded. "Life has strange paths," he said, "but some paths lead exactly where we're meant to be." Mara looked toward the blurry horizon. "Do you really think I'm a gift?" she asked shyly. Elias turned to her, his voice warm and certain. "Absolutely," he said. "Your strength, your kindness, your patience, all of it is a gift. Not just to me, to this ranch, to this town, to anyone who takes the time to truly see you." Mara felt tears gather in her eyes, not from sadness, but from a deep, gentle gratitude. For so long, she had believed she was a burden, too tall, too slow, too different. But now she understood something she had never dared to believe. She was not too anything. She was exactly who she needed to be. Her height helped her reach places others couldn't. Her gentle voice made people listen closely. Her struggle with vision taught her to sense the world with her heart. She was not a problem to be solved. She was a blessing to be welcomed. As the night settled around them, Mara leaned back and listened to the quiet sounds of the ranch. Somewhere inside her, the uncertain child she had been slowly transformed into someone brave, strong, and hopeful. She no longer felt lost. She no longer felt unwanted. She no longer felt like she had been sold away from love, because now she had found a home, a real home. And in that home, surrounded by the soft sounds of horses and the steady presence of the rancher who had seen her true worth, Mara finally understood what it meant to belong.